Where and when were you born?
So I was born January 28th, 1997 in Abington, Pennsylvania.
And does January 28th make you an Aquarian?
Yes.
And do you identify with some of those traits of being future oriented, visionary, uh, unique in some of your perspectives?
I guess so. I don't look into what these mean too much, but when I tell my friends, they end up saying that makes sense to me a
Yeah,
lot.
yes. What are three words that you would use to describe yourself?
Three words would be creative, hardworking, and shy.
That's interesting because you probably have to do a lot of public speaking like this. Is that a challenge for a person who tends to be a little introverted?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. I'm getting better at it, and I have some friends who support me with it. But yeah,
How do they support you? Just like, go, girl.
yeah, they're very supportive of what I'm doing. Oftentimes, I drag them into things, um, and sometimes just being there as a presence is helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have an older brother.
And is he involved in climate activism as well?
No.
What does he think about your work?
He supports it. He's not super involved with activism, really. He's a Latin teacher, actually.
Wow.
Um,
That's
yeah,
interesting to teach a language that no one speaks.
yeah. He's loved it. He loves Latin Greek culture. So
Does he teach in a university or in like a private high school?
in a high school, public school.
Really?
Mhm.
Oh wow. I didn't know that they offer Latin anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot that still do.
Interesting. What are your favorite subjects in school?
I've always loved biology and art. I'm actually studying ecology right now. Um, and yeah, I had a minor in art in undergrad.
Um, so uh, where are you in terms of your education right now?
I'm in my first year of master's.
In
Um,
in where, may I ask?
SUNY ESF.
Hmm. And is your master's in ecology?
So it's in ecology, but with a focus in mycology. So I like to study plant fungal interactions.
Did you see that wonderful, wonderful film that came out last year? Um, the Secret Life of Plants. That wasn't the name, but it was about all the fungi and all that wonderful.
I think I know which one you're referring to, and I think I wasn't able to see it at a theater, so I'm waiting. I think it comes out very soon, streaming.
What's the name of the man who's really known for his work with fungi and developed, anti infection tinctures and stuff? Paul Stamets.
Hmm.
He's really central to the movie. You'll love it. It's beautiful. And but I also think it's humbling because there's so much activity in the world that we don't know about. Like we only know 5% of matter and all the rest is dark energy and dark matter. We don't really know what that is. So it's humbling.
Yeah, I really love the interconnectedness of nature and how much we don't realize is happening, but we depend upon.
Yeah. So in terms of your activism, when did you realize we've got a problem and it's not future, it's right now?
Um, so I first learned about climate change at the time people were just using the term global warming when I was in elementary school. I have a very clear memory of like the first time I ever heard about it, and then decided by I think fifth grade I wanted to grow up to be a conservationist. Um, that hasn't really changed. It's funny, you can see videos of me where they ask questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's the same thing I say now. Um, but I'd say in the past 3 or 4 years, it's become a bit more central in my life, a bit more like there's something I need to do now. When I was in elementary school, people would always say, okay, you want to do this, you work hard in school, you grow up, you go to college for this, you go to graduate school, and then you become an activist and a scientist. That's definitely changed in the past few years.
And what made you change and realize, no, this is not future, this is now, I've got to do something?
I think just realizing with the science coming out how quickly this has become evolving, how important it is in the next few years for us to really act to mitigate climate change. Um, yeah, I just kind of started getting even more involved in things and started keeping up with the movement more than just the science. Um, yeah.
And what there's the Sunrise Movement, there's Fridays for Future. What kind of organization have you found most effective for your interests?
So I've only really gotten involved with a lot of those movements in the past year. So right now I just started with a local Sunrise movement. I've been kind of doing my own Fridays for the Future movement. Um, and before that, a few years ago, I started working with a group called Turning Green, um, which is another international group focused on educating youth and mobilizing them. That was the first big movement when I started to work with. But I think for me, it's a weird combination of all of them, and then kind of my own stuff that I do. I've also started working with Polluters Out. Um, yeah.
Well, let's take those one by one. So let's start with Turning Green. Who started it? Where? When? What are its focal tactics?
Okay. Yeah. So a mother and daughter started it as a group. Judy Shills and Aaron Schroed in California, San Francisco.
Hmm.
It originally started as I forget the exact name, but it was focused on women's beauty products, the realization that a lot of them had chemicals that would cause cancer and other health problems. And eventually, over time, it evolved to teens turning green and then turning green. Um, and they're really focused on mobilizing the youth. They have two big events they do every year. So one is called Project Green Challenge, which is an international challenge in October. Every day of the month is a different theme with 3 and sometimes more tasks to complete. And students around the world will compete in this and try and complete all these tasks, learn so much information, and you get points and prizes, and the top 12, I believe, get sent actually to San Francisco for a summit, which also ends in a speaking competition. But really, it brings everyone together, and you kind of end up with at least 12 new friends who are all passionate about the environment and all now super well informed.
What's an example of one day's activity during October?
So they can vary really widely. Some of the most popular ones involve let's say healthcare or beauty products. It might be search your toothpaste and find out what's inside of it and how that rates as healthy and environmentally friendly. And then find an eco alternative or make your own. There's also some that are a little bit more kind of relaxing, where it's nature based and it's go on a hike and tell us what inspired you during that hike, or more intensive, like show a documentary to your friends group on fast fashion and have a discussion.
Hmm. That's as an end note. That's an interesting thing because I don't ordinarily think of clothes as being a big polluter, but the fashion industry is one of the big ones, and I know that there is a kind of a movement to recycle and not use animal skin and that kind of thing. For me, I just buy everything in thrift stores, so I don't have to worry. Um, what what else is fast fashion versus slow fashion?
Fast fashion, so there's a lot of pieces to it. It has to do with the fact that I believe most clothing is thrown out within, I want to say, 3 months of it being bought.
Wow.
A lot of our clothes aren't really made to last anymore. They're made to get rips, they're made to be worn out so that you have to buy new. Clothing stores have gone from 4 seasons to what they call 52 seasons now. They're constantly replacing what's on their rack. Leftovers are often tossed. It also has to deal with social justice issues where a lot of people who are making our clothes are working in extremely unsafe conditions, sometimes even being locked into the rooms they work. So if there's a fire, they can't get out. A lot of their children, if they can't afford for them to be watched by someone else, will be there inhaling terrible fumes. It's also dealing with the fact that like a lot of our clothing now is made from, synthetic fabrics that every time we wash them is broken down into microplastics, which have been found in some species in the deepest parts of the ocean and also even newborn children.
Well, I didn't know that. What are the names of fabrics that break down like that? I mean, what is it? Rayon?
So most of your synthetic fabrics, the one I see most often is polyester.
Oh.
But yeah, really any of your synthetic ones, a lot of them are made from plastics or something like that.
So it sounds like we should buy cotton clothes, but there's an issue with how cotton is produced, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's a lot of people working on alternatives for different types of environmentally friendly clothing. There's a lot of issues with cotton, but you can try and find organic cotton, which at least doesn't use all the pesticides. The one thing is if you do get cotton and it's conventional, it's still not going to release those plastics every time you wash them.
Why? If it's cotton?
It won't release them.
Oh, it won't. Yeah, right.
Versus buying polyester. People are experimenting with bamboo and hemp as alternatives. But some of the best is to just, again, go to the thrift store and just pay attention to what tags are on your clothing. There's some people experimenting with different ways to capture the plastics when you wash them so it doesn't go down the drain.
How interesting. This is new to me. Have you been able to go to the San Francisco Turning Green conferences?
Yeah, so I went for the first time now 3 times ago. And it was wonderful. I was one of the finalists. I had spent my October, every free moment was just working on Turning Green. A lot of the kids who do it will say, like, they sacrifice sleep. Grades might not have been as great as they should have been. It's a lot of work, but it's really amazing, and it really introduces you to a new network. And I've gone back the past 2 years to help out because, again, it's a nonprofit. A lot of what's done is run by the help of just volunteers.
And did you give a talk at any of the 3?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at, of course, my first one, so we had to do that, about a 10-minute talk kind of summarizing our experience, which I gave. That was a lot for me. That was kind of my first time really public speaking on this. And since then, I've not given a full speech, but I've introduced speakers, interacted with a lot of people from all over the world. It's been really great.
Do people stay in touch on the Turning Green website or in chat groups, or how do people stay in touch throughout the year?
Yeah, we all have different chat groups. We, of course, exchange information for social media. A bunch of us also will help out with other things they need during the year that can be done online.
Like what?
A lot of their outreach, just kind of figuring out what emails to send things to, what emails are no good, replacing them. They also have, in the springtime, though I believe this year it's been pushed back to the fall, it's the Conscious Campus Road Tour where they actually visit um, a little more than 10, I think, universities, and will host a day where they're teaching students on those universities, about fast fashion, food, health products, all different things, and how to live more sustainably and consciously, and then actually help them create an action plan to change something on their campus. And you can go show up to those and help out with that too.
What are some of those universities?
So student groups or universities themselves apply to have people come. So I had it at my undergrad, which was Dickinson College, a small liberal arts school. But they've been at, full state universities. They kind of go wherever people are interested in having them and where they think they can have a lot, make a change.
It seems like most of the activist activity of all kinds is on the coast and not in the south and not in the central part of the country. Is that true for where these universities are?
So the universities are kind of all over, so I'm not very sure. They change every year. Again, each year people apply for them. I've met a handful of activists from central US and from the South, and they definitely have a harder time with their communities, kind of having them recognize certain things and accept, like, okay, what we do is not good for the environment. But they're still there. And then again, I don't know which universities they go to each year. It kind of changes.
When you gave that first 10-minute talk, how did you cope with stage fright?
So that weekend was really amazing. The talks occur at the end of the weekend. So throughout that whole few days there, I kind of became friends with a lot of people. So it was kind of, instead of talking to a group of strangers, it was talking to a group of friends who we were competing against each other, but we were all best friends by then, and we were all just kind of like, whoever wins. Like, we've gotten here, we're doing so much, we've met these amazing people. It was really nice. Part of my talk was about dealing with social anxiety while being part of an activist, because that was something very big for me. And so it was just kind of really nice at that point to talk. I've also luckily had experience with science fairs and doing presentations for those, which helps.
That kind of ties into something that's really on my mind, that studies show in the US and I think in Western Europe, there's an increasing rate of anxiety for teens, especially girls. And I wondered if you see that there is an increase, and if so, why? And in your talk, what did you say to do about that kind of anxiety?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'd say increase because I don't know older generations' anxiety rates enough, but when I go to school, when I go to new groups, pretty much every time I go, I make friends who are all dealing with different types of anxiety or mental health issues. And I haven't studied it too extensively. I have a friend who's studying mental health issues specifically in students studying the environment. But I have a lot of different ideas on where this could be. For me, social anxiety has been my entire life. It just came to a head high school and college. But, I think there's some things with our schooling and how that works. I think there's just kind of different parts of society that are struggling today, different issues that are kind of bringing it forward. I know after the last presidential election in my college, it spiked for like the few weeks afterwards. It kind of just felt like everyone was in mourning on campus. So yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of it.
Some climate activists talk about climate anxiety, or that's a major source of worry, because it's not something made up or some kind of phobia. It's real.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you suggest dealing with it? Take action, huh?
Yeah, I think taking action helps. I think talking about it helps a lot. I'm lucky enough that in college, in my friends group since then, we are very open about these things. I've had so many conversations since coming to my new school for my master's program with my friends here just about climate anxiety, about, our futures, about would we have children with the future that is ahead? How can we promise that? Where we've even talked about, like, what would we be doing if climate change wasn't such a big factor in our lives? Would that have changed the path we were on? Because most of us are here because of that. Um, I think talking about it helps a lot. Taking action can also help, but it's tough.
Um, it's tougher when you have a president and an administration that denies it and undercuts any environmental program they can find, maybe just despite Obama. I don't really understand the rationale. So, my question to you is, why didn't youth turn out to vote in these recent primaries in March? What if people care so much, why aren't they voting for people who are at least acknowledge that climate is an issue?
So I think there's definitely a combination of a bunch of different factors for that. Most of the people who I interact with, I know did vote, but I also heard a lot of people saying, they felt like there was no good choice. And so, in spite of the fact that, well, there's maybe a better choice than another, they were just so frustrated they didn't do it. It's hard too because, election days are during the week, and a lot of us are in classes where, I have a lot of professors where if you miss 3 classes, you fail a course.
Hmm.
There's, some people do deal with these anxieties, and the past elections have been such high anxiety they might not be able to leave their room on the days of voting just because anxiety is so high. A lot of people, so I've been registering people to vote multiple times now in the past few weeks. And a lot of people don't always know who can and cannot vote. People who maybe had felonies when they were younger and they're a little bit older now don't know if they're able to. But a lot of people, I think, are just they're fed up and they don't feel like there's a good choice. They don't feel like there's a candidate that represents them, and so they just don't bother.
I asked the same question of a woman who writes books about Gen Z, and she said a lot of them think government is so corrupt. What's the point?
Yeah.
Well, I hope people vote in November.
I hope so too. We're working on it.
When you talk to people who aren't young people who aren't registered to vote, do they say, "Oh yeah, thanks, I just haven't gotten around to it," or they say, "No, I don't want to because there's no hope," and or what are people's excuses for not voting?
So a mixture of responses. A lot of them just walk by and say, no, they're not registered. Do you want to register? No, and they just walk on by. But some people will stop and say they'll just talk about like they're frustrated. They talk about corruption in the government. They talk about, oh, I'm not going to participate in government because they don't represent me, even though you participate to get people who represent you.
Hello.
And a lot of them are just really frustrated with where politics have gotten and feel like, with our two-party system, with the candidates who come up, there's not one who they fully support, and they don't want to participate for that reason.
What do you think there is about your generation that I think makes them uniquely activists at a young age? I don't think before you'd hear about a 9-year-old or 11-year-old that was starting a movement like Lily in the Netherlands. So what's going on that Gen Z is so activist? Some.
Yeah. So like I said, when I was younger, it wasn't a thing you become an activist when you first care about an issue. Was you get an education through schooling and then you become an activist. And I think some of that is, Gen Z. A lot of these issues are, I feel like, coming to a head. That maybe millennials and some older generations didn't have to deal with. Global warming was something in the future to worry about. Where now it's very much today we're all being affected. I think also, a lot of people think social media is hurting us, but it's also raising awareness and allowing us to spread information without having to worry about censorship or worrying about, how the press likes to pick and choose its own stories. Um, a lot of the activists I know have come from me just searching for me, interacting with them on social media and learning what they're up to, not from mainstream media that we are
Right.
so reliant on before.
Right. And I wonder if there's anything about different parenting practices, because parents now consult with their kids. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Hey, buddy, you want to take this kind of lesson? And it seems like parenting style has changed. I don't know. What do you think?
Possibly. Again, I don't have that exact sight into what was older parenting, other parenting styles, but it definitely seems like a lot of, especially younger activists, are getting a lot of support from their families, which is really wonderful to see. Um, yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing is a lot of parents are supportive, but not everyone's. There's a lot of activists who are very frustrated because their families don't meet them eye to eye. Um, yeah.
What percent would you say of the activists that you know and interact with are young women?
Um, be a pretty high percent, probably like 70%, maybe 80.
And why do you think that is? Where are the boys?
So there's definitely a handful mixed in here, but I see a lot more girls, and I interact with a lot more girls or female identifying people. I think it's partially just we have, you know, I was talking with some people about how we like to do movements and we like to present as a single movement at a time. So you go to environmental strikes and you show yourself as an environmentalist, but then you go to a pride and you just show yourself as LGBTQ plus allies or members, and you don't show both. But I think a lot of us are mixed in with multiple, and I think that kind of breaks the chains, I guess you could say, to be able to show more. And I see women in a lot of other movements. I think we've dealt with a lot of, historically and currently, a lot of issues that are faced more heavily on women than on men. Um, and I think, especially in other cultures too, women are so closely part of nature. I think that pushes a lot of it. But women have been change makers for a long time, and I think this is just another example of it.
Do you think of yourself as a feminist?
Um, I think so. Yes. It's not a label I tend to use a ton super often. But I would definitely say that those are my views, and that's how I support people. Um,
Why did you kind of have to think about it?
um, I don't know. It's just I have, I guess, a lot of opinions on things. I don't always put labels onto how I see things. Um, but like I'm very much, I think feminism is not just about supporting women, it's supporting equality regardless of sexual orientation or gender, any of that. Whether you're, female, male, or non-binary, you should have equal opportunity, or something else. But yeah, so it's kind of weird because sometimes I think a lot of people think feminism is just women, but it's really everyone.
Yeah, it's about equality. What kind of pronouns do you like to use for you?
I personally use she, her.
Mm-hmm. Um, do you know people who are non-binary, and what kind of issues do they face?
So I have a large friend group that contains, or a friends group that contains a lot of people identifying as non-binary or gender fluid or questioning. And they deal with a lot of issues where, especially in older generations, people just don't understand. They're convinced that there is this binary, and it doesn't make sense to them that you don't fit into that binary. Like, if you don't question your gender, it's hard to understand what it would feel like to question it. And because of that, there's a lot of people who don't think it's real or don't think it's really something people should consider or is important. And I can tell you it means a lot to many of them, even when you just go to fill out a form and it asks your gender and it says male, female, or other. That can mean a lot more than people realize. There's a lot of fear when interacting with the older generation when you finally decide to tell someone like you prefer they them, or even trans people who are trans have a lot of issues with older generations that I think a lot of the younger generations, a lot of Gen Z, is finding much easier, even though it's still an adjustment. They have a lot of people I know have body dysmorphia, like they don't feel comfortable in their own body when they present a certain way, which, based on the fact that most people just assume pronouns, can make days really tough sometimes when everyone's constantly misgendering you.
Hmm. Why do you think it is that Gen Z and Gen Y was like this too, is really comfortable with diversity and intersectionality? It's not like a big deal. I don't care if you're LGBTQ or this or that or whatever. You're just a person to me. But I think that's a unique characteristic of Y and Z. Do you have any idea why?
I think there's been a slow progression through generations to kind of accept this, and it's taken that progression for one generation to acknowledge, okay, people might not feel this way, and another generation to be like, okay, we should allow them to show a way to do that, and then the next generation be like, that's perfectly fine. It takes a while, I think, sometimes to make a generation kind of start to understand, and I mean, again, a lot of my friends are LGBTQ I plus identified, but I see large amounts of it within younger communities. And I don't know if we are a higher number or if we're just more open about it. But
Interesting. And I wonder if it's in some ways a reaction to rigid gender roles. It's kind of no, I don't want to be stuck in femininity and masculinity.
yeah, I definitely see that. There's a lot of harsh gender roles that were kind of placed upon us. I remember being in preschool and being convinced there were boy colors and girl colors, and a girl couldn't like a boy color and vice versa. And then the first time I met a girl who liked the color blue, I was very confused because pink and purple were for girls and blue and green were for boys. Um, but I think there's a lot of that. I think there's also kind of not just recognizing like you don't have to fit those where you can like something of the other gender, but neither gender actually holds ownership of something. I have friends who are trans who like their favorite things would be considered very feminine, and people would think, well, why would you be trans? Trans masculine if you like feminine things, and it's just kind of breaking that down and realizing, no, you can be female identifying and love insects and trucks and things like that, and you can be male identifying and love, dresses or makeup or nail polish. Yeah.
The radical feminists of the 1960s were interested in this idea of non-binary. I'm thinking of fiction like Marge Piercy, Woman on the Edge of Time, where there was really no gender distinction. So the people have been playing around with that idea for decades. But now it's like more people are, well, it's not just a theoretical idea in a science fiction book. This is in my life. In Fridays for Future, how did you get involved and what did you do?
So I started seeing Fridays for the Future mostly in the beginning of this school year. I started seeing a lot of activists. They started becoming more involved with social media, specifically Twitter, which just kind of opened up that ability. I think.
What year was that? 1919? I mean, 2019.
Yes. And I think I saw at one point on some news outlet, like, 9 activists of color to know besides who aren't Greta Thunberg, something along those lines. And I looked into them and I decided I wanted to know more. And I kind of just started finding all of these activists and Fridays for the Future and a lot of these other organizations. And at that time, so as part of my graduate school, I teach classes. And on Fridays, I really can't miss because I'd be risking about 60 kids' education to hold up a sign somewhere and maybe see a few people. It's not a ton of areas of high foot traffic. Um, and so I wanted to be able to do something, and that's when people started pushing for digital strikes. So I decided there were a lot of amazing activists whose voices were not being heard because people really were focusing on, Greta Thunberg and a few other activists, mostly white activists.
Like
And
who?
this,
Like who? Jamie Margolin.
Jamie Margolin, yeah. Also, I believe Louisa Thunberg, I want to say. I probably am pronouncing all these names
In
wrong.
Germany.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to start raising the voices of all these other amazing activists. So for my Friday strike, I started drawing and posting at least 3 images of other youth activists, a very brief description of who they are, where they're from, what their age is, what they do, and a quote by them, because I personally love quotes. I think people say some really amazing things. So a lot of these pictures behind me are the result of that.
Could you tell us about a few of them, like who they are and why you picked them?
Yeah, so I have about 55 right now, a few more on my sketch pad. Let's see, we have, trying to see who, I have a lot over here. Vanessa Nakate, who is a youth environmental activist in
Uganda.
Africa.
In Uganda.
Yep, in Uganda. I actually drew this before her name became really well known because of her being cut out of the image with Greta Thunberg.
Right.
She does a lot of really amazing stuff. We also have, I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but Adosu Ademka, who's also a youth environmental activist in Africa. There's so many. I quiz myself sometimes on all their names. We have from India, Deepika, who's the 8-year-old activist who's getting a lot of attention right now. We have, there's so many on here on this wall at this point. I've got a few people from America. So we got Alexandra Villas Sonor, who is, I believe, in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've got a lot of indigenous activists up here too. Well known would be Autumn Pelter. I don't know if you can see her from here. And Helen Bowling. So I've got a lot up here. And I try to know bits of things about what they're all up to. But I just keep finding more.
Where would someone go to see them online?
So the images I have here with all those quotes are actually on my Twitter account. I have a pinned tweet that just has a thread of all of them as I post them. Nowadays, I rotate between once or twice a week posting a bunch of them. But a lot of these youth are activists who are active on Twitter, other websites. A handful of them don't really have much social media outreach just because they're always out doing things. But yeah, every time I look, I keep getting more. I think right now I have a list of like 70 more to do. And I stopped adding to them like a month ago because I was like, let me get through these first. So
fabulous. So Fridays for Future, your commitment is you're going to post something about an activist, and that's your strike. That's neat because then you don't have to commit to a certain place and time.
Yeah, so that's what I started with. I've also started doing digital strikes with me holding a sign each week. And I've also started recently this semester because I now actually have the ability to spend some of my Fridays elsewhere. Um, I've done, I think, 2 or 3 times now where I've taken a few friends and we go to our public library and we really are focusing on registering people to vote. We've registered over 20 different people now to vote who have been eligible, some of them for a long time and just never did. Some who thought they weren't eligible and found out they were, and talking to people about why voting for the environment matters. Um,
That really makes a difference. That's great.
yeah.
Do you work at all with the Never Again Parkland students' efforts to get youth to vote, to register to vote, and to vote?
So this little effort is not actually with any specific organization. I use it kind of as my version of the Fridays for Future strike because I I really like having an action that I can do and see direct changes, and that get more people listening than just talking to them. Even though I think that's also extremely important. So it's not aligned specifically with the Never Again Parkland, but I definitely agree with their goals totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how did you get involved with Sunrise? That's your most recent
Mhm.
addition.
Yeah, so there's a local art gallery near me who focuses on social justice. And I went to one of their events there and I started meeting other youth in the area who are doing activism because currently, right now, it's mostly been me and dragging my friends along. Um, and so I started working with the Sunrise group because they work, um, they're not part of it, but they basically are part of the universities around here. That's where they're pulling from. I first heard about them in my undergrad, but we didn't have a local chapter. We had our own version for specific to our school. So I started working with them. Mostly right now we're prepping for Earth Day.
And what are the plans for Earth Day?
Uh, so we're planning a strike in Syracuse that we're trying to make it pretty large and starting to try and get people to be aware of it now so that when it happens, we can get as many people as possible out to come.
Is the Earth Day focus led by Sunrise, or is Fridays for Future joining in, or who all is organizing it?
So this strike is really Sunrise, but it's also so my school, SUNY ESF, is Environmental Science and Forestry School. Um, we have groups here. They always do a week-long celebration of Earth Day, and I think there's been a lot of push from multiple groups to start doing something. The Fridays for the Future chapter that's here is mostly just me and what friends I bring along. So yeah, we're kind of planning on all of that, but this push is definitely Sunrise focused with the other groups helping out. We also are outside of Sunrise. I have Polluters Out, who's working on a strike on the 20th right now.
Um, it seems like Sunrise has the most active national organizing in the U.S. in terms of youth organizing. Do you agree with that?
It definitely seems like one of the big ones, I would say. So there's also, I know, 0 Hour, but I don't see as much chapter wise with 0 Hour. So Sunrise would be the biggest one I see. I think that has like chapters that are super active.
Yeah, they call them hubs. Do you uh, get information? How do you communicate with Sunrise National? How do you keep in
Um,
touch?
so we have there's a hand like 3 or 4 youth specifically who are kind of the main people for our local chapter. They're the ones who started it, and they hold kind of, I guess you could say, higher positions, though we don't really have a ton. So they stay in contact with the international one, and especially the one in New York, just with where we are. And so a lot of like our training stuff and planning comes from the ideas of the International Sunrise Movement.
Um, are there chapters of Sunrise in Canada and other countries that you know about, or is it all U.S.?
I'm not sure. It's very U.S. focused with politics, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of it's in Canada. I'm just not fully sure.
Yeah, I'll have to check. Sunrise came out and endorsed Bernie,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously the Green New Deal is really an important policy. Um, what 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 do you think will happen if Biden is elected? Because it looks like it's going that way right now, anyway.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where this election's going to go. I think it's still very close with a lot of people making claims every which way. If Biden is elected, um, I really don't know what's going to happen for this push forward with the environmental movement. I hope we can put in, constantly more senators and congressmen who are interested in the environment. One nice thing I have seen in the past few years, once we kind of have started to realize that the federal government isn't doing a lot, is a lot more cities and states themselves are taking on things, especially with, we left the Paris Agreement and all of a sudden a bunch of cities started committing to it, which was really nice to see. So I'm hoping, if Biden does get elected and we can't easily push through a lot of environmental policies, we start putting a lot on more local governments to do things where it's easier to have a little more say there.
Do you know what Biden's stance is on the Green New Deal? I don't know.
I don't know a ton about his stances. I know he does not do well with like much environmental policies. Um, as far as his stance on the Green New Deal, I don't know for sure.
Yeah, we have to
Yeah.
find out. Um, so in terms of Polluters Out, what do you know about when and where and who founded it? I
So
mean,
it was
Pollution Out.
um, Polluters Out was founded by, I believe, three young women. Um, Helena, um, I, I can't pronounce a lot of one of their names. Aisha, I think it is, and Isabel, I want to say. Um, I think they were the three founders, and it was this idea that it's a coalition. It's not a group. So it's not like you are a member of Sunrise where you're a member of a group, but it's a coalition. So Sunrise as a unit can be a member of this coalition. It's realizing we have a lot of groups who are already doing a lot of things, but we need stuff to unite them. And so it has an international base. It works with Friday for the Future groups, Sunrise groups, Earth Guardians, Zero Hour, and all these different things. And it's focusing on pushing forward demands. So it has international demands and then regional demands like North America, South America, Central, Latin America. Um, and then, of course, Africa. I don't know if that one's divided up or just general. And pushing these forward that really focus on, first of all, part of it was inspired by the UN COP conference this past year that did not do much of anything for us, and having them realize and recognize that we shouldn't have the main polluters on the table, at the table when we're talking about the environment. Exxon should not have its high executives as part of members there. They shouldn't be accepting money from those groups for their thing if that means they're going to have a bigger say. And the same goes for politics. We have so many politicians who are in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry that just shouldn't be a thing anymore because now the voice of the people is being ignored because the money is coming from another group. But also stopping, new fossil fuel infrastructure like new pipelines is another big one. And then another huge part of it is also recognizing Indigenous sovereignty and reparations for Indigenous people and minorities who have been targeted. So as a lot of people know, minority communities are often targeted for pipelines, for factories, for anything that is considered unsightly or harmful to their health is pushed out of white communities and into minority communities.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge this and make reparations for it.
Do you know what area of the U.S. the three young women who started Polluters Out live in?
Um, and one is in New York. I think one might not be in the U.S., but I'm not fully sure. Um, again, this has become international, so it has different places around the world that are working on it. I know we're pushing for the 20th. There's going to be a big action in New York, and then at the UN headquarters, I believe, and then I think LA or San Francisco, somewhere in California. There'll be another big action. And I know there's being an action plan in Kenya, England, all over the place.
Fabulous. What do you know about Zero Hour? What is it doing?
So Zero Hour is another youth group started by Jamie Marlin. That's really, really focused, from what I see, on youth participation in government, pushing for environmental politics, educating about that. I very much like Zero Hour and its goals. I've had a little bit of trouble figuring out its specific actions because it doesn't quite have hubs the way the Sunrise Movement does. But I've met and talked with a lot of people who are part of it. And I think, yeah.
Okay. What do you do about backlash? Because I think a lot of environmental activists get criticism. Oh, you're just a pawn of somebody, blah, 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 blah. Trolls on social media. Have you had that kind of reaction? And if so, how do you cope?
So I haven't had much of that yet on social media. I think I've just not quite gotten the audience that a lot of youth activists have. I have a background in science, so I know a lot of the science of this. I tend to just generally, I don't tend to get angry very much, so I tend to look at things, I guess, very logically, and I'll just start responding with the science to refute a lot of what they say. Ignoring them if they're just getting to be to a point where there's no way you can reason with them. They're just gonna be stuck in their way. And a lot of activists are supporting each other. We have group chats for different activists. And if there's someone who's becoming really problematic, as a group, we'll work to make sure that they can't be like harping on the one person anymore. Yeah, there's a lot of good support I've found within the activist community that's helpful for that.
From your understanding of the science, the UN climate report said last year we have maybe 12 years to turn it around. What's your understanding of how much time we have before we're really trashed?
Yeah. So the report you're talking about has a lot of scientific basis. So we are in very much, I guess, crunch time for this, because everything we're doing at this point is snowballing. With greenhouse gases, it's heating up the atmosphere, melting the ice, which is raising the water level, which is changing composition of things. But also without the ice, it's going to keep more greenhouse gases in. There's a lot happening there. And as I said, I find the interactions of things really interesting, but that's where a lot of these issues are arising from. So I would say we're definitely within crunch time. There's a lot of statistics about climate change where it's happening within my lifetime that some of these massive disasters are going to occur. We already have people who are suffering and dying from climate change. As I said, I go to those conferences in San Francisco, not this past year, but the year before. I was there during the wildfires. I was there for about 5 days and wore a mask on my face the entire time. And I came back unable to breathe. I never had asthma, never had breathing issues, and I was using 2 inhalers multiple times a day for a month and a half.
Oh, wow.
I described it to my friend once, and she's like, "You just described a asthma attack that lasted over a month." And I was like, "That sounds right." But like I constantly see from Africa, there's people who are dying already from these. So we're saying it's crunch time for like this mass disaster, but we're already starting to get them.
I live right near the big campfire, it was called, in Paradise. I live right in the valley below it, so it was pretty horrendous to see those flames. And um, what do you think are the main issues in organizing? Because when I think about my experience and what I've read, it's burnout, and it's how do you keep everyone involved in kind of a flat organizational system, not have bosses and hierarchies and stars, but get things done. So, what do you think are the main issues, and what do you think are the ways to deal with them?
Yeah, burnout and mental health are a big issue. A lot of the activists I know, every day or two, I'll see someone posting like, "I'm stepping away for a week because I'm exhausted because mental health is real low right now." That's been a big issue because again, a lot of this movement is youth. I mean, we have everyone from elementary school to graduate programs. For my graduate program, I'm a full-time student. I teach 20 hours a week on top of that, and then I do activism in my free time, whatever exists. It's a lot. I've seen, in high school you should be worrying about, colleges and grades and whatever else you want to worry about in high school or elementary school. You shouldn't even have to be thinking about these things. Um, so I think that's a really big thing. We all have so much we want to do, but we also have to still, keep up with all of the normal things that we need to do. Um, I would say, right now also getting everyone's voice heard who needs it is a bit of an issue. Again, we have a handful of activists who people really know and like are a common name, and we have a lot of people who are doing amazing work, but no one sees it, no one's spreading it, no one's helping. Um, and so there's kind of that misbalance, but a lot of that's on the media, just getting the media to actually showcase us. And I think people to take it seriously because, you might see an 8-year-old girl and think that's an 8-year-old talking about something, but like she knows what she's talking about. Just because, we're youth doesn't mean we don't know things. And luckily, I guess, I'm part of the older group of this youth, being 23, but still get that from a lot of people where older generations are like, no, you don't know what you're talking about yet.
um, what about the issue of hierarchy versus flat organizing? How do you get things done without having bosses?
So that can definitely be hard. I think a lot of these movements have, instead of like a singular boss, they have a group of the main people who, are the ones we like to check in with each other, and so they're the ones who will check in the most with being like, okay, we want to do this now. And most of the time it's like, great, go ahead. But I think these core groups of people are doing a really great job at like making sure everyone gets something to do, and that we can stick to an idea, but doesn't necessarily make it so that they're above the other activists who are doing the stuff for them. In the groups I see, there are the people who started it and the people who maybe have a position in the group, but it doesn't really raise them above anyone else. It just means like, if you're not sure about something, go to them and they probably know what's going on.
Mm. In groups that I've been in, something that I think would bother me the most is some people talk just to kind of be heard, and it makes the meetings long. And some people say they'll do something and don't. And so you have to kind of check on people to see if they're really doing what they said they'll do. Do you find those are issues or not?
I think those things are kind of always issues. I've luckily not had much to deal with that in these movements. A lot of them are made of people who really care. And there's always some people who just constantly want to say things at different times. And I think there's also an understanding in these groups that, like, we're all youth, we're all doing 25 other million uh, 25 other things. So it's rarely is it one person who's like, okay, you're in charge of doing this, especially in the larger groups. It's like, hey guys, we need some people to do this, and 5 or 6 people will say they will. And it takes reminders, but eventually at least someone starts to pick up that slack. And I think it's passing things around instead of owning something as specifically yours.
Hmm. Um, what do you see yourself doing 5 years from now?
Um, I'll probably still be in school. I'm hoping to eventually, get a PhD in probably botany, looking at, again, plant fungal interactions for possibly restoration purposes. So that's probably what I'll be doing a lot of it, maybe taking a few years off in between. But I'm really hoping in 5 years from now we will get to have more changes that are happening at a quicker pace than what has happened before in my lifetime. Recycling, I remember being taught it in elementary school and people still don't understand it in now that I'm in graduate school. So I don't know, I have a lot of hopes for what's going to happen in 5 years, but I don't know where we'll be exactly.
I thought of the video. It's called Fabulous Fungi.
Mm-hmm.
So you will love it. Do you see yourself teaching, or do you see yourself working in a lab or something like that, or both?
I really want to do research. I also um, play around with the idea. So as a student for science, a lot of the issues that people bring up and our teachers bring up and say it's kind of going to be on us a lot is scientific communication. A lot of that previously and still currently is not happening. Like the general public's not learning all of these amazing things we're finding out. And that's part of what really hurt the beginning of the, at the time, global warming issue. But so as an artist, I like to explore how I can use art to explain scientific concepts. So instead of doing normal like school teaching, I hope to be able to be doing some of that to kind of the spread the news about what's happening while also doing research, hopefully in a combination of the field and the lab, hopefully with restoration or increasing our understanding of a lot of what we don't know in those areas.
You have a lot of work. We have a lot of work because I read a National Science Foundation survey that a quarter of Americans thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system. I
Yeah.
mean, hello, that's really astounding. And they, oh, and a lot of people don't believe in evolution. There's a lot of science ignorance out there.
There's a
I think
lot.
Mike Pence doesn't believe in evolution.
Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely a lot of misconception and this misunderstanding between belief structures and like knowledge. And I think also part of what hurts this is a lot of people don't realize how many people don't know or understand. And so you might be trying to get someone to understand, something like climate change, but first they need to understand like what like the temperature of the planet and how that affects everything else. And you start using larger words and people start to zone out because they don't understand what it is. And there's a lot of just disconnect there. There's a lot of like, I remember people being like, when we had the last presidential election, oh, they're in this state, like we're Pennsylvania, we're northern state, like people know about these issues. And then you realize, yeah, but if you go 2 hours outside of the city, you're going to hit an area where you think you're in the South. Like 200 years ago, sometimes with the type of knowledge and information that's being shared. Um, and
Did,
so I think we have to be able to start sometimes farther than we think.
did you hear that the Trump administration is trying to limit the amount of science that can be included in government reports?
I I've not heard about that one specifically, but I know they've been doing a lot to decrease the amount of science that we can share, spread misinformation about it.
And then one of their advisors was saying, oh no, carbon dioxide release is good for the planet. Have you heard that one?
That one I heard. Yeah.
I mean, you can laugh or cry because it's so crazy. But all I can say is I hope we don't have 4 more years of this.
I hope not.
Oh my goodness. So is there anything else that you think people should know about organizing, what's effective, what's not, about youth and girls' contribution to this that we haven't discussed?
I just think that I've heard a lot of this and don't always see it so much, but we need pretty much everyone and anyone who's interested or willing to learn to be part of these movements. I mean, I come in a lot with my science background, but I also bring my art into this. We need people of every type of background because there's all different people who learn and gain knowledge in different ways. And I think sometimes we kind of forget about that and focus on one way of sharing information when really we need to share it in every form that we can.
What do you find is an effective visual image? Because when people look at a flyer or poster, it's they have to get them in a second. What works?
I think being very clear with wording and information. You don't want to assume that anyone's starting out with certain information ahead of time. And being very accessible. There's been a lot of times with this movement and many others where we get so caught up in what we consider right or wrong, we forget that there's accessibility issues and there's people with certain needs that maybe don't always fit these goals, that we need to not target them or not spread hate towards them because they need our support and we need their support too.
What's an example of someone like that with accessibility issues?
So, there was that whole big push to stop using plastic straws, which I agree, if you can avoid using a plastic straw, don't use them, but also understand there are people who would have a disability which makes it hard for them maybe to pick up their glass or drink from a normal glass, and maybe they can't, for certain reasons, use these other types of straw alternatives we have, and we shouldn't be going up to them and telling them they're wrong for using something that was probably originally designed to help them.
Flight shaming is another example of that, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to visit my grandparents, but they live in Florida. I haven't gone to visit them in 4 years. We all have different reasons we need to go places. Even simpler things. Polluters Out, for instance. We're trying to share a hashtag that is Polluters Out. And there's, recently I've been made aware of this accessibility issue where when you use a hashtag, all these words are condensed into one. And if someone is using something that reads the screen for them, it doesn't know separate words unless you capitalize them.
Oh.
So we changed the hashtag from all lowercase to capitalizing each word to make it more accessible for people.
Ah, I see. Good.
It also makes people with other reading disabilities or issues able to read it a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.